Well, good evening. Welcome, everyone. We've been having some technical difficulties, but we're ready to go, and I'm excited. Sister Leah is going to present. She says somewhat controversial, so that's just a tease. But I want to thank everybody for showing up, everybody that is watching our stream live, and everybody who is here in the audience. Thank you for coming. So thank you for coming. We're going to open up with a word of prayer, and we're going to get started. Amen? Amen. We bless the Lord. Father God, we come to you today in the precious name of Jesus. Lord, thanking you for this opportunity to come together, Lord God, and learn more about our history, our rich history. So we just ask that you would have your way. This is our prayer in Jesus' name. Amen. I introduce you to Sister Leah Dotson.
Okay, I'm so sorry. Yes, we had a little bit of technical difficulties, but we good now. Okay, so thanks for coming. We still should end relatively around the same time. This is not that long of a presentation unless y'all got comments, which you should. But okay, so what we're talking about today is her story. Oh, I'm past the thing. Okay, so what we're talking about today is her story. I titled it Her Story, Reclaiming History Through the Lens of African American Womanist Thought. So notice I did not, well, first let me start off by saying I am as unapologetically feminist womanist as I am unapologetically black. A lot of times we are told that we have to pick one or the other, or that there's a lot of misinformation around feminism or womanism that sometimes will people will act like you're like an enemy of blackness because you have the audacity to understand that I have a dual kind of role in this country that kind of puts us at a disadvantage, which is being a woman and being black. And I figured I would do this now because right now, at this time in our country, it should not be a secret in no way, shape, or form that black women have a duality of being black and woman that sometimes works against them, as we saw with this past election, because Kamala Harris did not lose because she was black. A black man was already president. She lost because she was a woman, period. So anytime anybody tries to, say that, talk about, you don't need to worry about feminism because you black, we gotta put black before being feminist. No, I'm black and I'm a woman and I will not divide the two. So, like I said, I think right now is a perfect opportunity to kind of unpack some of that, and kind of, like I said, in all of my things, again, I will sneak this in every single presentation I ever do. When the lion tells his side of the story, the tale of the hunt. So I'm gonna skip that. Until lions have historians, hunters will cease to be heroes. I say it all the time. Until lions have historians, hunters will cease to be heroes. And what that means tonight, it meant something different last week. What it means tonight is, I'm gonna say lioness. Because a lot of times the lioness still doesn't tell her own story. So even when we're telling the story of blackness, we're not telling it from the lioness's point of view. So the lioness has a particular experience in this country that even the lion doesn't. So we are going to go ahead and get into it. So why this class? First and foremost, let's start off. This is not a male bashing session. Feminism, womanism is not male bashing. That is a misconception. It is 100% a misconception. Because you say you're a feminist or because you say you're a womanist does not mean that you don't like men. As a matter of fact, womanism derived and kind of split a tiny bit from feminism because it didn't take into account the need for black women and black men to work together because of our particular situation in this country. So we couldn't abandon our men in a way that traditional feminism sometimes would. So that was part of the break between feminism and womanism, is because womanism took into account, and womanist is a term phrased by Alice Walker. So we'll get into that a little bit later, but it took into account the fact that we have a particular place in this society where we can't just abandon our men because we kind of need each other to survive, right?
Amen.
So, amen. Amen. So, it is not a male bashing session. However, it is a safe space to unpack the duality of being unapologetically black and woman, And it's a place for the lioness to tell our own story. So, before we get into it, we got to talk about some key terms, because a lot of these terms are wrong and they're used wrong in society. So in order for us to kind of go into the thing, we have to have a shared understanding of what these definitions are. So before we get into the subject, we got to unpack what's patriarchy, what's matriarchy, what's duality, what's feminism, what's womanism, what's egalitarianism, and what's a worldview. And this is not going to take long, I promise you. It sounds like a lot, but we do need to talk about what these terms are so that when we're using them, we are not thinking they're something that they're not. So patriarchy. I know you guys have heard patriarchy, especially with this last election, and depending on what side you lean on, patriarchy could be a rah-rah patriarchy, rah-rah for the patriarchy, or it could be down with the patriarchy, especially with the erosion of women's rights. All of that type of stuff has been attributed to the patriarchy in this country, right? So what exactly is patriarchy? Because there's a couple different ways that we can look at it. So patriarchy in its most basic sense is a system or society of government in which the father or eldest male is head of the family and the descent is recognized through the male line. So we live in a patriarchy. Everybody gets married, takes their husband's last name, the kids take their husband's last name. That's at the basis of patriarchy. That's what it is. It's just when the bloodline follows the lineage of the male of the household. That's it. That's what patriarchy is. Because America has a history of oppression. America was built by oppression. The people who came over here when they first sent Europeans over here were criminals. They were criminals from Europe that they sent over here. So they weren't good people. They just weren't good people. They sent them over here basically to colonize the land. America has had a history, so when they got over here, they weren't too fond of the Native Americans. America was literally built, interwoven with oppression and racism and all of that stuff. I'm sorry to say, it is what it is. So because that has kind of been the history of how America was founded, patriarchy took another sense. So it turned into not just us following the male bloodline, it turned into white males pushing their dominance over white women. White women were not allowed to do anything in this country. Nothing. Only up until 1970, 70-something, was universally where women, period, were allowed to get a bank account without their husband signing off on it. So it's not been that long ago. So 1970 was the first time a woman could get a bank account without her husband giving her permission. So America has a long history of oppressing their women, right? So it did not change when the Africans came over. They said that we're gonna keep that same thought process, and patriarchy in that type of a society took a little bit more of a sinister form. So patriarchy could also be number two, a system of society or government in which men hold the power and women are largely excluded from it. The dominant ideology of patriarchy. So those are the two definitions of patriarchy. It could be just your bloodline, or it could be a system of oppression, right? So keep that in mind. So what is matriarchy? Matriarchy is the exact opposite of patriarchy. It's when the bloodline follows the woman. So this is why worldview comes into play, because if your worldview is only shaped by what you know right here, right now, then you will have a very limited worldview, and that will color a lot of how you see life, right? There are numerous societies where matriarchy is the rule of the day. The bloodline follows the mother. The kids take the mother's last name. That's just how it is with a lot of different societies. So matriarchy is a form of social organization in which the mother or the eldest female heads the family. Descendants and relationships are determined through the female line. Or it's a system organized around the principle of mother rule, in which mothers or females are the top power structure. So it could be both and, right?
Excuse me, can you give us an example of country in today's world that follow
matriarchy? Sure can, and we're going to get to it. Yep, I got a whole list of them for you. Yep. So duality. So when I said that duality, so remember when we talked about last week where we said we wear the mask and we know what that means? That means we code switch. We know how to operate in one area one way, and we know how to operate in another area another way. That's just how black people have been in this country. We wear the mask. We have a duality. Same with women. Women have a duality and anybody, you can have a duality of being black and being poor. So then you're dealing with the issues surrounding your color and your socioeconomic status. There's a duality in there. Because I could be black and not have to deal with anything to do with being poor, because all black people ain't poor. I don't have that duality. You know what I mean? So you could be white and you could be poor, and now you're dealing with, socioeconomic issues, but you could be a male, so you don't have to deal with the gender issues. Or you could be a poor white woman and have to deal with being a woman and being poor. So there's a duality there. Black women got to deal with black women, and sometimes poor, and being a black woman ain't the same as being any type of woman. It's just a lot that black women have to deal with, and that's called the duality. So duality is the quality or condition of being dual. So again, there's just two different things there. So feminism, it irks my soul the way that people try to do it irks my whole entire being the way that people try to make feminism a bad word. Feminism literally only means, I don't care what they try to break it down into, I don't care how much they try to tell you you hate men, I don't care how much they try to tell you that you're a traitor to the race, that is not what feminism is about. Feminism strictly is the advocacy of women's rights on the grounds of political, social, and economic equality to men. Period. That's all feminism is. So anything that's attributed to that outside of that is somebody else putting their own bias on what that word is, and it's usually for their own benefit, right? So that's all feminism is.
Repeat that again.
Feminism is the advocacy of women's rights on the grounds of political, social, and economic equality to men. So basically feminism is saying, look, we need to be equal to men, period. Yes.
So can a man be a feminist?
Yes, there's all kind of men that are feminists.
I know.
Yeah. Yes. Feminism is not just a woman thing. There's all kind of men who are feminists. Yes. Then now all that means is I just believe that women are equal to me. Now, can you be a feminist and still subscribe to patriarchy? Yes. In the purest form. Because patriarchy only means that the man heads your household. That doesn't mean that the man oppresses you. Because just because a man is the leader of your household, or just because a man takes the leadership role and your kids follow that leadership role, that don't necessarily make that an oppressive structure. That just means that it's a patriarchal structure. So you can be a feminist, and especially if a man and a woman come together and a man is the man in the household and they have daughters, why would you not want a society in which your daughters will have rights and be treated as equal and don't have to, work for pay for nothing, and you know what I mean? I have to work twice as hard. You know what I mean? It's not that. Being in a patriarchal society, unless you're subscribing to the type of patriarchy that's like, no, I don't want you, stay barefoot and pregnant and don't do nothing, and I'll run you and I don't give you no money, and that type of oppressiveness. But you can be in a patriarchal structure and still be a feminist, right? So don't let nobody tell you that you can't. Yes.
You want to get into, or maybe we can do it some other time, equality versus sameness.
So we could get into that another time. So that's the man you want to talk to right there, because we are extending this out past February. So if you have topics that you do want to talk about that we're not talking about, I will talk to Pastor Pierre, because he's going to be scheduling classes all the way through March. So womanism. Womanism is a feminist term that acknowledges the limitations of black women's history and the experiences within feminism. The term was coined by activist writer Alice Walker in her book In Search of Our Mother's Garden, which is a great book. Womanist theology is rooted in the experience of black women who have had triple oppression: race, gender, and class. Womanist is to feminist as purple is to lavender. So there are two different colors, right? Same family. And again, I talked about it a little bit. There's another thing that makes me want to pull my hair out when people say that, black women was tricked by white women into feminism because I ain't had nothing to do with black women, and y'all let these white women manipulate y'all into hating y'all men. Okay, that's dumb. Don't let nobody tell you that, because black women have never been gullible. Ever. We have never been gullible, especially in the realm of socioeconomic and power structures and equity and justice, because if not for black women, we would never have the rights that we have in this country. I know black men are on the forefront, black women are the ones who organize in the back, right? So we have never been a gullible people. We have never been gullible. Black women were never duped into feminism by white women. We knew that we were oppressed. Like, it's like they say that and it's like it invalidates, like it's almost like gaslighting us. Like we don't know what we feel. We don't know what we see. We don't know what we experience. We were never duped by white women. There was a shift because we understood very early on that the feminist movement did not quite speak to what our experiences were. So a lot of the white women in the feminist movement were racist. We ain't sisters with y'all. You know what I mean? Just you can't use us for equal rights because that's what was happening. They tried to use black women because we are powerful, we are orators, and they tried to use us, but we quickly was like, nah, not so much, right? So womanism is a term that was kind of collectively adopted by black women as opposed to feminism, but it still means that you propose women's rights. It just means that we understand our issues of race and class as well.
What was the working definition of feminism again?
So womanism is a feminist term that acknowledges the limitations of black women's history and the experiences within feminism. So womanist theology is rooted in the experience of black women who have had triple oppression: race, gender, and class. So that brings us to egalitarianism. Egalitarianism is an ideology, principle, or doctrine referring to equal rights. Egalitarianism in its basic form means a political structure or doctrine that means that everybody is equal. Everybody is equal. That's what egalitarianism is. Everybody should be treated as equal and have the same political, economic, social, and civil rights. That's all egalitarianism. That's what I strive for. That's what I would love to see a society of, is an egalitarian society. So worldview. This is particularly important. I'm not going to spend a lot of time on it, but I already talked about it. Worldview is a philosophy or life conception of the world. I broaden my worldview by experiencing a whole new culture. The reason why worldview is important, like I said, is because if you only think that where you live, if you think your worldview extends in your own box, your one little box of experiences, you will have a very limited worldview, and you will probably talk a lot of nonsense because you don't have the worldview that incorporates other cultures or other things. So it's best to get a broad worldview and then determine how you feel about life, because even if you feel a certain way, that's beautiful, but let that be shaped not because you don't know nothing else, let that be shaped because you know some other stuff and you still land on what you land on, right? So worldview is basically just understanding the world and having and learning how to develop your philosophy on the world based on that. Now, why this pertains to what we're talking about today, this is what you were asking for. These are a list of different countries that are right now matriarchal or matrifocal. I'm out the camera, but it's okay. So, matrilocal, these are agricultural kind of societies where you literally leave your home and go to your families, go to a different families. So matrilocal or patrilocal means that when people get married, they leave and go live with the father's family. That's patrilocal. Matrilocal means we get married, but we go and live with our mom's family. That's different from matriarchal and patriarchal. Because you could have a matriarchal society and have a patriarchal. You have a matriarchal society and have a patrilocal structure where your birthright and your birth name follows the mother, but you still go live with your father's people. Like, it gets complicated sometimes. It is not as cut and dry as we do it in America. But for the sake of us, just talking about some matrilineal, so the Akan people were matrilineal. Their bloodline follows the mother's name. Let's see, the Bunt or whatever in Asia, see, they were patrilocal and matrilineal. So they lived with the father's people, but they were matrilineal, and where the wealth and the names followed the mother's bloodline. Hopi Indians, Native Americans. We've heard about Hopi Native Americans. That's like one of the few that we talked about in North America. They were matrilineal and matrilocal. So they followed the mother all throughout. They lived with the mama's family, and their power structure revolved around the women. Let's see. So as you can see, there's a few of them, right? There's somewhere in Asia, the Maluku. They don't have matrilocal. They live where they want. but it's still matrilineal, so it still follows the bloodline of the family. So all of these I put up here, so you can see there's 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6. All of these are matrilineal societies. So not everybody takes the father's last name, right? So this brings us to the history of why we're here. So when we're talking about African American women, going back to slavery, this is not the joyful presentation from last week. It gets kind of dastardly in this one, but we we need to talk about these things sometimes. So when we're talking about slavery, slavery was brutal. It was absolutely horrible. The amount of sexual assault that went on in slavery, perpetrated upon African women, does not get talked about enough. We all know we all different colors and all that type of stuff, and we know that happens. But it just does not get the credence that it did because it happened so often. It was literally a tool that they used. So it wasn't just we feel randy one day and we just gonna take advantage. No, it was literally a very well thought out intentional tool to say that we are going to rape the women, impregnate them, and dilute their bloodline. So that was very intentional, right? It says Angela Davis, who is, you know who Angela Davis was. Y'all know she was Fight the Power, but she was definitely a feminist, as well as a Fight the Power sister. So Angela Davis and her work on, because she's a historian too. So she said that rape was such a common practice on many of the vessels to permit crew access to females, who were the most victimized group on the ship. They were repeatedly beaten, raped with impunity by the crew and the officers. African captive, one of the captives in his memoir said that it was common for the dirty, filthy sailors to take the African women and lie upon their bodies. By the end of the voyage, African women had conceived. So that lets you know how long the Middle Passage was. The Middle Passage was long. You can literally get pregnant at the beginning of the Middle Passage and conceive a baby somewhere in there somewhere. So it was a long, long journey. So by the end of the Middle Passage, African women had conceived, thus increasing their value to the New World, because if they got a baby, I'm gonna get double. How sinister is that? So yes, so that happened. African women and girls were completely vulnerable and incapable of protecting themselves, and conversely, this sexual coercion had a twofold effect, since it also targeted African American men who suffered from the inability to prevent or stop that abuse. The goal was to destroy the woman's will to resist and to demoralize the men. However, it created a form of equality because those acts of brutality and oppression were applied to men and women indiscriminately, and the resistance and passion against enslavement was equal on both sides. So all it did was just make us want to fight that much harder together, right? So the role of African women in resisting enslavement was very well documented. So this is another thing about it. They often let the women kind of roam a little bit more free than the men for obvious reasons, because they wanted to take advantage of them and they just didn't think smart enough about them. So a lot of times the women were responsible for starting the revolts that you saw on the slave ships, because they had a lot more freer access. They would poison the crew. So a lot of the women on the ships were very, very much responsible for a lot of the uprisings. They provided comfort to the fellow captives. They prepared and distributed the food. They led the songs of mourning and sorrow, and they were the ones who endured, again, that personal trauma of repeated rape, separation, and death of their children. So many of those children that were born actually died on those ships because of horrible circumstances, right? So here's where it gets a little tricky, and y'all probably gonna have something to say. So when we talk about slavery, raise your hand if you have heard one of the most worst things in slavery was the art of the infemination of the black man, because it stripped black men of their ability to be in a patriarchal, in their natural patriarchal state, and that in turn effeminized them, and it had drastic consequences on the black male psyche for years and years and years and years to come. How many have ever heard that? Like, that was like the worst part of slavery for black men.
I have.
No, I heard it was a big part, but not the.
Well, Well, it was a part. It was a big part. So maybe take worse out because that is a qualifier. But it was a part.
Yes.
Yes.
But what they were doing is basically breaking their spirit and trying to put them into a state where they even felt that they were just animals, which they were being called.
Yes.
Right. And so once they broke their spirit,
Yes.
and like you said, it made them feel took their masculinity away from it through beatings, butt breaking, and all the rest of those things that they were doing to them.
So, yeah. So let's talk about that. So yes. What were you gonna say?
Yeah.
Okay, so yes, so this is why we have to have lionesses tell our story, and we have to kind of look at it through another lens. Because if we say that black men were, some of the worst things that happened to them is that they were effeminized because they couldn't take that patriarchal point. And when they're talking about patriarchal, that just means head of the household, right? That they weren't able to assume that head of the household. That in turn kind of implicitly implies that the worst thing that could ever happen to a black man is that he be turned into a black woman. Like implicitly, that's what it kind of implies, right? So that's absolutely not really true, to be honest. So to suggest that black men were dehumanized solely as a result of not being able to be patriarchs, because the patriarch is just the head of the household, solely because they couldn't be patriarch implies that the subjugation of black women was essential to the black man's development of a positive self-concept. So never in the history of our people did we think that in order to be a man, I have to kind of subjugate my woman. And if I can't subjugate my woman, then that means I'm less than a man. Because if we keep it real about slavery, black men were never demasculated. Now, were they stripped of their patriarchy? Yes. But patriarchy and masculinity is two completely different things. They were never emasculated. Men were never, you got to think about it. The whole purpose of having a male in slavery was so that he could be a buck. A buck was a strong black man. You got more money for the strong black men. They gave them strong black man jobs. They put them in the field. The more virile and strong they were, the more money they got. Never in the history of slavery did they seek to emasculate black men. Patriarchy and masculinity do not go hand in hand. And that's what kind of shapes a lot of the oppressive mindset that they think that you can't be a real man unless you somewhere subjugating women. Do y'all see how that works? Because that's not true. Black men were stripped of their patriarchal responsibilities because they weren't able to be the heads of their household. But as far as masculine, they were told they were never given the jobs of women. That's not what they were doing. They were out in the fields primarily. They had some house slaves, but those were usually the master's children. So they were in the fields. They got a bigger price for those masculine roles, right? And there were societies that castrated men. Remember we talked about the Arabian slave trade? It was common practice to castrate men. Common. So if they really wanted to effeminate black men, they just would have castrated them. George Washington Carver, fun fact, he was castrated. Remember y'all talked about him. He was castrated because he was taken in by a white family, and the white family was like, we don't want you messing with our daughter. So they castrated him at a young age. That is emasculating a black man. No, they stripped them of their patriarchy. And here's the thing, even when they tried to strip them of their patriarchy, when slave families got together, they still followed that patriarchal structure. It was not like the man was still head of the household in most slave families, 100%. So that's this revisionist history that is sometimes told that's not quite right history, right? So the feminization, I just don't see where there was ever an effeminization process to black men in slavery. Stripping them of patriarchy, yes. Effeminizing them, no. Because being effeminate does not mean that you have to subjugate women, yes.
I was gonna say I had never heard of the feminization part.
Oh.
So you're kind of debunking that.
Yeah, I mean, it's
Okay,
rampant.
as
That's a
something
rampant
that's
thought.
sold and not real. Okay.
Yeah, and that's also as not real as this myth of, all of it kind of ties hand in hand because they took the black fathers out the house with the welfare. Okay, so there's a whole nother discussion, but Lackawanna Blues. If you get a chance, watch the movie Lackawanna Blues. Like, I talked to my grandparents about this too. In the movie Lackawanna Blues, yes, they did have it to where you could not have a man in the house because they like, look, if you got 2 able-bodied people in the house, we're not giving you welfare. Same as they do today. But that was less about stripping the black man of their ability to be in the house as much as it was, look, it's 2 of y'all in here. I ain't giving y'all no money for 2 of y'all in here. Y'all both better go to work. So the only way that they got the money is if the woman was by herself with her kids. But this is what really happened. They used it to their benefit the same way folks welfare fraud now. They got men living right in their houses, giving them money on the side, and that's exactly what we did back then. We found out how to game the system together. We ain't never put our men out. And I will stand up here to say, if you was a man who got put out your house for a $300 welfare check, you was kinda less than a man. So, don't blame women for that. That had nothing to do with women putting you out of the house because you were a man and in order to get the welfare check you had to be. That's not true. That's some revisionist history. Watch the movie with Lackawanna Blues. Lackawanna Blues shows that specifically where he went in, they was like, oh, the social worker coming, hide your clothes. Hide your clothes. And if you talk to your grandparents, they may tell you stories about, oh yeah, we had to hide our clothes because we was getting that money. And he went to work every single day. Went to work every single day and we see, she's shaking her head back there. Went to work every single day and we got that money. Same thing that happens now, right? So, moving on. So, a book, Incidents in the Life of a Slave Girl. Amazing book. Heartbreaking book. It's by Harriet Jacobs. Harriet Jacobs was a slave and she was taught how to read and write, and so she chronicled her life as a slave girl. And it's one of the very few accounts of a young girl in slavery. There's a lot of accounts of slavery. There's women who have told their stories. There's men who have told their stories. Very rarely do you find a young girl who's told her story from being a child all the way up through slavery. So Incidents in the Life of a Slave Girl by Harriet Jacobs. And this is just some excerpts from the book. And it was a great book. I actually read this in school. This was one of the books that I had to read in high school. And they ain't really teach us a lot about African American history in school, but I did read this in high school.
Is Pharaoh Ben in here? Is it Ben now?
I don't know. I hope not. I would hope not.
It has to be the way they're going.
Oh yeah, well, the way they going, yeah, it would probably be if it's not. But Incidents in the Life of a Slave Girl, I read this in high school. But it says, but now I entered on my 15th year, a sad epoch in the life of a slave girl. My master began to whisper foul words in my ear. Young as I was, I could not remain ignorant of their import. So she already knew it was coming. When they told me, so she had a baby. She said, when they told me my newborn babe was a girl, my heart was heavier than had ever been before. Slavery is terrible for men, but for women, it is far more terrible for women. I would rather drudge out my life on a cotton plantation till the grave opened up and give me rest than to live with an unprincipled master and a jealous mistress. Because they caught hell from the mistresses too. Caught hell from the mistresses because they were jealous, because they knew what the men was doing back in the back, right? So there is something akin to this struck me. Wow. There is something akin to freedom in having a lover who has no control over you except that which he gains by kindness and attachment. Do y'all hear how powerful that is? She said it felt like freedom just to have a lover who just loved you. And they have no control over you. They just loved you because they just wanted to be kind to you. That felt like freedom to her. Yeah, wow. Yeah. So, I got 2 people to talk about, right? Because these were some, when we're talking about like her story and black feminism and like strong black women, right? I'm only gonna talk about 2, because I can go on all day. But I'm gonna talk about 2. I picked Sojourner Truth, right? Because we talk a lot about Sojourner Truth, but Sojourner Truth is one of them people like Harriet Tubman where it's like, we know her story, but do we really know her story? You know what I mean? So do we really know? We just know she used to speak a lot, but do we really know what was up with Harriet Tubman? I mean, with Sojourner Truth, right? And Sojourner Truth was such a phenomenal woman. She was an American abolitionist, an activist for African American civil rights and women's rights and alcohol temperance, because she was deeply religious and she was like, alcohol is the devil. So she did not want people to drink. So Truth was born into slavery in New York, but escaped with her infant daughter to freedom in 1826. She actually went went to court to get freedom for her son and won in the 1800s. So she sued for freedom for her son and won her son's freedom, which was crazy, right? She gave herself the name Sojourner Truth in 1843 because her real name is Isabella Bumfree. She gave herself the name Sojourner Truth after she had been convinced that God had called her to go into the countryside and testify to the hope that was within her. So sojourn means somebody who travels along, and truth means that she felt like she was the truth of God, right? So that's how she got her name Sojourner Truth. So I'm going to read part of her most famous and widely known speech, and it was during the Civil War, and it's called Ain't I a Woman? I say this I quote this so much to people when they start on the whole, black women and, being protected and y'all won't protect it, and this is also controversial. Never in the history since we got off the boat have black women really been protected. We have been protected in our own individual families, yes, because our men have protected us in our own individual families. That's what a man is for. I don't want to go grab no gun if I ain't got to. That's what you for. I don't even want to take out the trash if I don't want to. Right. If I ain't got to, I don't want to do it. I'm just gonna be honest. We just gonna be honest. Now, can I do it? I said, do I do it? Yes. Can I do it? Yes. But do I want to? No.
Do I want to? So
when people say, y'all want protection now, we have never really been collectively protected. And when I'm saying protected, we have never in this country been collectively protected. We bore the lash. We have never been collectively protected. They can quit that revisionist history. We have dealt with every single thing that black men have dealt with, including up until present time getting shot by police, getting brutalized by police. We have dealt with every single thing. We in this together. We was never somewhere chilling and being protected from the vices of this world. Never, ever, since stepping off the ship, right? So, and this illustrates it so well. And I'm not gonna read all of it.
Thank you.
Shut up. But that's my daughter, I can say that. Oh, I'm online. They ain't know what I was doing. That's my child. I can tell her to shut up. Okay. So this is her. That man over there says that women need to be helped in the carriages and lifted over ditches. And I have the best place everywhere, where nobody ever helps me in the carriages or over mud puddles or gives me the best of any place. And ain't I a woman? Look at me. Look at my arm. I have plowed and planted and gathered into barns, and no man could have me. And ain't I a woman? I could work as much and eat as much as a man when I could get it, and bear the lash as well. And ain't I a woman? I have borne 13 children and seen most of all sold into slavery, and when I cried out with my mother's grief, no one but Jesus heard me. And ain't I a woman? They talk about this thing called the head. Well, what's this they call it? Intellect. Yeah, that's it, honey. What's that got to do with a woman's rights or Negro's rights? If my cup won't hold but a pint and yours holds but a quart, wouldn't you be mean not to let me have my little half pint measure full? And then that little man in the back there says that woman can't have as much rights as man because Christ wasn't no woman. Well, where did your Christ come from? Where did your Christ come from? From God and a woman. Man ain't had nothing to do with him. So Journey wasn't no truth. She wasn't no joke. So
She was the truth.
she was the truth. So what this is saying, now he did because Joseph raised Jesus. So we ain't gonna not give men credit. But what she's saying is don't get it twisted, right? So but that lets you know. We went to the which I want to do a trip. We went to the Smithsonian African American Museum. Oh my God. I cannot say enough about this museum. You need about 2 days to really do it, but that museum is worth it. We should really do like a church trip there because it is 100% worth it. It is amazing. So in that museum, like it takes you from like slavery all the way up, and it does such a phenomenal job. But they have a lot of instances and pictures. Women, I mean, oh my gosh, not to get into a whole bunch, but no, women pick that cotton just like men. brutalized just like men, in the heat just like men. And the thing about women is, and this is why I said that we got to be really careful and tell the right story, because when they got home, this is why we still had a patriarchal society even in slavery, because when they got home, it was the women dealing with the kids. It was the women washing the clothes. It was the women cooking the food. Yes.
But we was taking up the trash.
Y'all was taking out the trash. Y'all was taking out that trash. And the men was out, hunting, get what they could. They would hunt, and they would make sure that they were provided for. And I don't want to make it seem like men were not worth their weight in salt, because there are a lot of accounts of men being killed because they were protecting their wife and kids. They were killed because they were protecting their wife and kids. So it ain't like they was just like, oh Lord, what I'm gonna do? Because my kids are being, no, we fought together. And I think that's what we just have to understand is that we fall too much on patriarchy and we fall too much on feminism, where we really need to focus on egalitarianism, because that's how Black people made it. We did not make it void of each other. We made it together.
That's right.
Yes. So, Makita, Queen of Sheba. So, since we in church, I said, let's talk about Queen of Sheba, right? Queen of Sheba, and I know we talk,
He has a question.
I'm sorry, I missed the question. Yes, sir.
I want to introduce myself. I want to say something, and I know that a lot of people don't disagree with me, but I'm 88 years old. I was in the service.
Mm-hmm.
I worked out General Motors for my 30 years. I was the chairman of the Civil Rights Committee.
Mm-hmm.
But I want to ask you a question.
Mm-hmm.
When did God create a Black person? I've never seen a Black person in my life. And my grandmother,
Mm-hmm.
she was very dark.
Mm-hmm.
She had dark hair, just like yourself.
Mm-hmm.
You got black hair.
Mm-hmm.
Does that make you Black?
It makes me African.
Does it make you Black?
No.
You see, where I see it is that when they say you're Black,
Mm-hmm.
that's only a stain and a stigma
Mm-hmm.
on you to hold you down for the rest of your life. And I don't understand why we, as so-called Black people, haven't stopped white people from calling us Black, because they are not white.
So what would you call us? What would you call us
We're
then?
descendants
We are descendants.
of brown.
We are brown, yes.
That's what we are. We're descendants of brown. You only have 4 descendants. You have the Asians and the Caucasians.
Mm-hmm.
You have the reddish people, the Latinos,
Mm-hmm.
and you have us. And we're not Black. Black is like this guy's sweater here,
Mm-hmm.
or like your hair.
So Black, and this is something else that we can talk about. So hold that thought, because I think that's a whole nother class, and I'm really happy that you brought that up, because that is definitely something that we can unpack. Because quickly, we did not start off as Black, so you're right. We
We're
never,
not Black.
we didn't start off calling ourselves as Black. People called us Negro, which is a derivative of the color Black, and then people call people white because it's just easier to say. But not to get into it right now, which we can talk about that in another class, but Black is one of the terms that we kind of gave to ourselves because we were abandoning colored and we were abandoning Negro.
It's a stigma and a stain. It's
Okay.
only from the day that you're born to the day that you die. You have that stigma on you,
Uh-huh.
and we need to get rid of it.
Okay, well, we can talk about that on another class. So come to another class, and we're going to put a pin in that, and we're going to talk about that, because I bet you some people in here got some... So, so I bet you there's some people in here who got some feelings about that. However, so hold that thought. I don't want you to lose it. Hold it, because we definitely can talk about that on another class. You taking notes, Minister?
Yes, sir.
All right.
Yes, ma'am.
All right. So, but for the purposes of this presentation, I'm probably going to keep saying Black because that's just what I'm used to. But that doesn't mean I'm not hearing you, and that doesn't mean I'm not taking what you're saying into account. It just means it's going to be too much for me to switch my thought process. But you may have a good thought process, and you might change my mind, but we're going to leave that to another class.
Amen.
Okay? All right. So, Queen of Sheba. So, Queen Queen of Sheba. Now this is why I picked Queen of Sheba, because remember we had that talk about egalitarian, right? What was egalitarian? Somebody tell me. Equal. Queen of Sheba. I read this. Now this is not fact. This is somebody's opinion, but I love their thought process on this because they talked about, it was a theology major, and he was going for his PhD in theology, and he did his dissertation on the egalitarian relationship between Solomon and Sheba. And I was like, that's interesting. And then when I read it, I said, oh my God, I love this story. So we're going to talk about that. So Queen of Sheba. So let's talk about Ethiopia, because that's where Queen of Sheba was from. So, hold on, I'm going to skip forward because they know they was wrong for that. They know they was wrong for that picture down there at the bottom. Yes.
Her eyes is blue.
Oh, yeah, so I'm going to go back to that, yep. So, yeah, they know they was wrong for that picture. Who was that, Laurence Olivier? Who was that? Whoever it was. Oh, they know they was wrong.
Before he cut his hair off.
They know they was wrong for that, huh? So, but back to Ethiopia. So it is widely known that Queen of Sheba was from the land of Ethiopia, Eritrea. She was from that area. So a lot of times what we see when we see even Ethiopians today, there is a serious issue with colorism in Ethiopia and Eritrea, right? So 9 times out of 10, you are going to see Ethiopians look like the top right. They're such a they really have a distinct look, Ethiopians, and they're beautiful people, to be honest. Like, their bone structures, and Eritreans and Ethiopians have some, like, amazing bone structures, right? But most of the times you see Eritreans and Ethiopians look almost like Arabs. They're, like, fair-skinned. That's just what they usually are portrayed as. That is not the whole of Ethiopia.
Right.
Ethiopians look about as diverse as us. Now, they do have a distinctive bone structure in that region, but the skin color is completely diverse. So these are some other pictures of Ethiopia, and what we all know from African history, as time goes on, multiculturalism suggests that, we lighten up, we darken up, we have a lot of intermixing, but the closer you are to the original, the darker those people were. You know what I mean? It's just the natural account of migration and evolution, right? So, yes, you were right back there. This is a young man, but this is the thing about black genes, too. We derive everything. You can derive any color from black genes. That's why you can be albino and be black. That's why you can have blue eyes and be black. That's why you have green eyes and red hair and be black. But, yes, that is a Ethiopian child with stark blue eyes. Yes. So these are also Ethiopians. So she's Ethiopian, these people are Ethiopian, she's Ethiopian, he's Ethiopian. So all of those are Ethiopians, right? So Queen of Sheba, this is what I particularly think she probably looked like. This is not Queen of Sheba, but I'm just giving you a visual, right? So after hearing, so we all know the story of Queen of Sheba. So after hearing about Solomon's wealth, y'all know the story of Queen of Sheba and Solomon?
Yes.
Raise your hand if you know the story of Queen of Sheba and Solomon. Okay, right, so I ain't gotta go through all of it. So after hearing, about his wealth and about his peaceful kingdom, Sheba, as the West knows her, decided to go see for herself, and then she traveled like a long ways away. She had a caravan full of like servants and gold and spices to give to Solomon, and she went to Solomon, and they kind of just chopped it up, basically. The story goes that she just went because she was so fascinated by his kingdom, and she was so fascinated by his wisdom that she wanted to go check that out for herself, right? Because Sheba was the queen at the time. So accounts of Solomon and Queen of Sheba, and this is from 1 Kings 10 and 2 Chronicles 9. It indicates, if you read both of those, it indicates some similarities between the two, right? So they both were good listeners, they were deal makers, they both were very well educated, they both were groomed to reign, they both were beloved by their people, and as heads of state, both Solomon and the Queen of Sheba, they both valued trade, they excelled in diplomacy, they gave and received expensive gifts, they enjoyed solving and writing difficult sayings, they assessed people accurately, they displayed pomp and pageantry, and they occupied occupy secure thrones. So all of these things, if you look and if you read those, you'll see some similarities between the two, right? And so he surmised, which again, now this is opinion, this is not fact, but I like I like the thought. It said that the queen and king seemed intellectually well matched. Perhaps they inspired the saying attributed to Solomon, because Solomon was attributed to saying, as iron sharpens iron, so one person sharpens another. So, again, looking at a closer look at Sheba's character, she stood out because she had rank and she used it well. So imagine the buzz that her caravan caused by coming into Jerusalem streets. Honesty, she had honesty. Solomon's display of wealth and food and table settings and burnt offerings said that it left her breathless in 2 Chronicles 9:4. She had assessment skills. She had public speaking. Sheba gave Solomon an exceeds expectation rating by saying, not even half of the greatness of your wisdom was told to me. So she was building him up, right? Spiritual growth. Praise be to the Lord, who your God, who is delighted in you and placed you on his throne as king. She actually challenged Solomon too. So Sheba reminded him why he reigned. Because of the love of your God for Israel and his desire to uphold them forever, he has made you king over them to maintain justice and righteousness. So also she had some advanced preparation for that. So after studying Solomon from afar, she acted accordingly, knowing his wealth. She gave him over tons of gold. She devised some hard questions to asking, and she showed herself pretty savvy in prayer because she knew who he was. So this is what I found fascinating, and I was like, I like that idea. So the reason why I brought that up is because there's examples in even antiquity of black women and black men coexisting in an egalitarian way, right? So Solomon and Sheba kind of exhibits that. Sheba's fact-finding, pomp, and field visit differ from Solomon's other exchanges. So in those he led, he dominated people, he lectured, and people listened to him. They deferred to him and largely remained silent. This person says, I think his brilliance isolated him. And if you are ever somebody who reads a lot or is kind of up and studying, you do kind of isolate yourself. I don't know if anybody has ever had that experience, but you do feel kind of isolated from the masses because you start not to talk like other people talk. You start not to want to have the conversations other people want to have conversations about. You know what I mean? So imagine somebody who is so wise that you're always expected to be the smartest person in the room. Oh my gosh. That would be horrible. You know what I mean? Because like you said, iron sharpens iron, and who won't sharpen him, right? So it says, yet with Sheba, Solomon listened. She shared her thoughts openly, perhaps that encouraged him to do likewise. He seemed to desire to please her. 1 Kings 10:2 and 2 Chronicles 9:12. Of equal rank and at the apex of their powers, they conversed. I think they both perhaps lacked friends. So they respected each other as equals. Even back then, he didn't seek to subjugate or say, woman, concubine, go fetch me my drink or something, whatever. They respected each other as equals, right? So if you talk to Rastafarians believe they got together and had a baby. That is not in the Bible. So we don't see that in the Bible, but in the Bible it shows that they had an encounter, and it was an encounter based on a mutual respect of intellect, right? So even back then.
They had a child.
Melanic?
Melanie.
Yes.
The Ark of the Covenant is there too, but we'll talk
Yes,
about
we'll talk about that. You taking notes? You're taking notes? You next up. So Melanic, I didn't even want to get into it. But you can get into it. But yes, Melanic. So yes, they had a child. Yes. Well, I ain't gonna get into
They
it.
had a child.
I'm gonna let you
Tradition
get into it. Tradition. Yes, I'm gonna let you get
Oh,
into
one
it.
more thing.
Yes.
And if you read the Songs of Solomon,
Yes.
pay attention to what he's saying. He's talking about African American, well, not African American, but
African.
a dark skinned lady. He talks about her breasts, her nose, a whole lot of stuff. And it's a love song. Go ahead.
Yep. Talking about Sheba. But she won him over because I think that she came as his equal, not as just I'm beautiful, Queen Sheba.
Is it true that Jesus was darker skinned?
Okay, see,
Yes, he was a darker skinned person, for sure. Yes. He came from a region of color. Yes, sir. Yep. All right, so Nzinga, and then we can wrap up. So Nzinga, who's ever heard of Queen Nzinga? Good. Now y'all can learn somebody different. Okay, so Queen Nzinga, she was the ruler of the Ndongo and Matamba, which is present-day Angola. So Ndongo and Matamba were two different areas, but they were both under the rule of Queen Nzinga. And this is a real picture, a real portrait of what she really looked like. So we do know what she really looked like. So that is 100% Queen Nzinga. She African. She African. This is African Queen. Okay, so Queen Nzinga. So when Queen Nzinga was 10 years old, her father ascended to the throne. So as a child, she was greatly favored by her father. So I don't know, is anybody in here Game of Thrones people? Game of Thrones or House of Dragon? Well, if you're a Game of Thrones, House of Dragon people, because I was kind of brushing up on this, and because I didn't know her backstory, I just knew that she was a warrior. And I started looking into her backstory, and I was like, this sounds awfully House of Dragon-y. I mean, awfully House of Dragon-y. So in any case, so her father took the throne when she was around 10 years old. She was not seen as a direct competition to the throne to her brothers because she was a woman. So the father couldn't pick a son that he wanted to, do the most for, because then the other brothers would get jealous. So he picked her. So she was 100% her father's favorite, right? So he lavished her with attention. She received military training up under her father. She was trained as a warrior to fight along her father. She displayed considerable aptitude with an axe, which was a traditional weapon of the Ndogan people. She participated in many official governance duties alongside of her father, including legal councils, war councils, important rituals, and furthermore, she was taught Portuguese by the different missionaries, how to read and write in Portuguese. So around this time, slavery was full go. This was not at the beginning of slavery. She was in Angola at the heart of the slave trade, right? So during this period, her area that her father was managing had multiple crises, largely due to the Portuguese, because the Portuguese came in and they kept trying to take their territory for the slave trade, because they wanted to occupy more territory because they wanted to get more footing in the slave trade, right? So large parts of their territory kept falling under Portuguese control. So they waged war against her people constantly, burning their villages, taking hostages, they account that they took nearly 50,000 people just from this region alone into slavery. So it was a constant war with the Portuguese during this time her father had to deal with. So this is her father's political landscape. He inherited a mess, right? So in 1617, her father died, and her terrible brother, he was a terrible king, he ascended to the throne. And it's not that he was a terrible person, he was just a terrible king. So he was very, very iron-fisted, like no nonsense. I ain't about to play with these people. We gonna show them. Like he was very, he had no diplomatic skills, and I don't think he understood that he didn't have the power that he thought he had. So he was just making a mess of the country because he was not set to rule. Because as we know, a lot of time rulers is not about how strong you are, how much strong you can show you are. It's about diplomacy skills. It's about strategy. It's about a whole lot of other things that her brother did not possess, and he was making he was running it into the ground. Kind of like today, because kind of like what we seeing today, where we just think we about to be out here like John Wayne and a cowboy, and it's just because we got nuclear weapons, we just gonna strong arm everybody, and what we are doing is making all of our allies our enemies on top of the enemies that we already have. So her brother was a lot like 47, it seems, a little bit. So, having consolidated his power, he vowed to continue to fight the Portuguese because it was a pride thing at this point. But however, he lacked the military skill because the father was showing Nzinga all of those things, not him. So, faced with another threat, he contacted his sister. Oh, and this is what I forgot to tell you. So, this is where you get Game of Thronesy. So, he saw his sister as a threat. They never got along. And so, she knew when he got in power, she said, oh, he gonna start discriminating against me, and my life might be in danger. So I'm going to leave and go to Matamba. So she went to their other area, their other village, and said, okay, well, you do what you do over here, I'm gonna stay over here. So when it started to get thick, he called for her and said, hey, I need you to go talk to these Portuguese people. I need you to be a diplomat. And so, because he knew she spoke fluent Portuguese, and it was getting to the point where he understood his limitations. So he called for her, and she was the best person for the job. And she agreed, now listen, she agreed to lead the diplomatic mission with the stipulation that she be granted the authority to negotiate in the king's name, carte blanche, leave me alone and let me do my thing, and she needed permission to be baptized. And he was like, baptized? Because they weren't Christian. They baptized, what you need, whatever, do what you do. So he said, you got my permission, and so she said, okay, I'll go ahead and do it. So this is how smart she was. So according to a popular story, when Nzinga arrived to meet with the Portuguese, there were chairs there for the Portuguese officials, but only a mat provided for her. This is the type of behavior that Portuguese was common for. It was their way of displaying the subordinate status for the conquered Africans. In response to this, Nzinga's attendant formed himself into be her chair while she spoke to the governor face to face. So her person said, cool. Formed himself into a chair, she sat on him. You don't give me a chair, I'll make a chair with my person. So yeah, so as a sign of like, don't play with me, and as a sign of, okay, now we're gonna be diplomatic, but don't play with me, right? So, she employed flattery as a diplomatic tool, and according to some sources, deliberately chose to contrast her brother's belligerent style with that type of decorum because she already knew he's not getting it done, I gotta try something else. So as an ambassador, Nzinga's main goal was to secure peace between her people. So to this end, she promised the Portuguese to end the hostilities because at this time, the Portuguese was kind of tired of fighting them too. So she said, listen, we'll stop fighting you. And she kind of said, you know, my brother's actions, he's just a young king, he don't know no better. So she kind of down-talked her brother a little bit just to make them feel a little bit better. And she said that I will allow Portuguese slave traders inside of Ndongo and offered in return escaped Portuguese slaves fighting in her brother's, in return if you give us our people back that you took from us. Y'all can have your little slave trading places in Ndongo, but you got to give us our people back. So, and she was adamant that the Ndongo territory would not pay tribute to Portugal. So we're not about to be your vassal, we're not about to be your little colony, because she said that only conquered people paid tribute and her people had not been defeated. So she was kind of warning him, like, okay, I'm here diplomatically, but don't think that we're defeated. And she expressed a desire for cooperation between the two kingdoms, noted they could support each other against their common enemies in the region. When the Portuguese questioned her commitment to peace, Nzinga offered to be publicly baptized, which she did with great confidence. So she already knew she was going to play the baptism card. Right. So that lets you know she studies the Portuguese. She knew what they was going to do. She that's why she was a strategist. So, yep, you heard it right. She allowed slavery in her kingdom, right? So, this is what we talked about before. These were very complex civilizations. These were not civilizations of hunters and gatherers and people just running around with spears. They had legit foreign policies and foreign policy issues. And so at that moment, they had to like figure out slavery is a real thing. So we have to deal with these world powers. So how do we deal with them? And a lot of times they had to deal with them with, okay, we'll allow slavery, we allow y'all to trade over here, but leave these people alone. They had to negotiate like that. So that's, again, but as dastardly as it is, it's also a sign that they were an advanced civilization. They were not a bunch of folks who just didn't have real world issues. So right. So despite Queen Nzinga's fierce resistance against Portuguese colonization and enslavement of her people, she did allow slave trading within her kingdoms as a strategic move. And here are some reasons why they had to do this, because it was a strategic necessity. Nzinga was in a constant struggle for power against the Portuguese and rival African leaders. The transatlantic slave trade was already deeply entrenched in the region, and refusing to participate outright could have weakened her kingdom economically and politically. By engaging in the trade, she secured European weapons and resources necessary to sustain her military resistance. Like many African rulers at the time, she navigated a world where the slave trade was already well established, and she understood that controlling the flow of the captives gave her leverage in negotiating with European powers and regional rivals. So also this lets you know that we was trading across the world. So we were trading with Europe. We needed the goods that came from different places. So we negotiated, slaves in order to get the goods that I need for my country. Was it right? Absolutely not. Do we understand it? Yes. Right? So selective participation. While she resisted the enslavement of her own people, she allowed the capture and sale of rival groups, particularly those aligned with Portuguese, particularly those aligned against her. So now, from what I understand from my readings over the years, they had no idea what slavery was in America. So yes, they allowed for slavery, but they thought it was the slavery that they were used to. Slavery in Africa was quite a bit different than the slavery that we had over here in America. Slavery in Africa, the slaves were not treated as property as much as they were treated as servants. Like you had to work off a debt, and maybe you could work off your freedom. Slaves were allowed to marry within their culture. So it was not that type of chattel, what's called chattel slavery that we experienced. Now, if they knew how bad it was, would they have still sold them off? I don't know, but I do know that they thought slavery was the slavery that they were doing in Africa, not the type of slavery where it was just, you don't have a single solitary right in this world. They never treated their slaves where they don't have any rights whatsoever. But they did have slavery, right? So, Makeda rose to power when her brother died. And her brother, when she came back, when she negotiated that, he was like, yes, yay, sis, you're awesome, stay here. So when he did that, he also killed her sons because he didn't want any challenge to the thrones. So he killed her sons. He said, you can come on back, but your sons won't be challenging me for my throne. So that was just a little bit of information. So she had 99 problems. If anybody is a rap fan, y'all can finish the rest of that. I ain't gonna put it in here in the good Lord's house. But she had 99 problems. Being a punk was not one of them. So when she rose to power in the 17th century, she inherited all of that mess. Those wars were still going on. They were still fighting with the Portuguese. She inherited a whole entire mess still, right? So it was highly complex and volatile. She had to navigate the Portuguese expansion and the slave trade. They were still over there doing that. International conflict, and Nzinga's path to power was not straightforward. She initially served as an ambassador and advisor before seizing the throne after the death of her brother. Her rule was contested by local nobles and rival claimants, forcing her to consolidate power amid internal dissent. So what she had to do was, because people were like, oh, this woman ain't about to come and take this throne, they organized people against her to kind of usurp her. So she knew they was coming, so she had to be smart enough to say, okay, where am I going to get my allies? So she pulled different allies from different places to make sure that, people who were not normally her allies then became her allies. So if anybody challenged her throne, then they had to deal with not just her, but they had to deal with all of these other people she had amassed. So she had to do that. She had regional rivalries, such as in the Congo. They were also fighting with the Congolese and the Dutch and the Portuguese. Religious and cultural shifts. Christianity was spreading through Portuguese influence, creating a bunch of divisions within the African societies. And Nzinga herself had converted to Christianity for diplomatic reasons. And she had a lot of economic pressures due to the demand for enslaved people. the economy made control over the routes and captives a main source of power, and Zinga had to engage in the slave trade systematically in order to arm and finance her resistance against all these people that she was fighting with. Okay. So, she was a military strategist. So when she had to deal with these people and deal in these wars, she employed guerrilla warfare. And you know, who knows what guerrilla warfare is? Guerrilla warfare is like, not that the British is like, we're coming, the British is coming, and we're gonna march, and you're gonna see us, and we're gonna march down the thing, and you know, you see them coming, and they shoot each other right there. Guerrilla warfare is we hide in trees, we about to sneak attack you, we gonna hide, and we don't have no rules. Ain't no rules to what we do, we just gonna get you. Bump the rules. So she engaged in a lot of guerrilla warfare, she employed a lot of diplomacy and alliances, she fortified their settlements, she integrated former slaves and exiles. So the former slaves and the former exiles, she was like, y'all come with us. And she was known for psychological warfare, where she had a commanding presence, and she used psychological tactics and mixed it with diplomacy in order to inflict intimidation, but keep her people in check. So, along through her reign, she ended up getting a peace treaty with the Portuguese in 1656. Under the terms of peace, she agreed to cede the lands of her kingdom on the western coast of Portugal, but she redefined the border between Portuguese and Mantaba. So she did all of that, and I say all of that to say is that she was a bright cookie. Imagine nowadays, imagine again, like think about Kamala Harris. Imagine it would be no different than her coming in and we at war with Russia, we at war with China, we got economy problems, we got folks fighting in the streets, we got people climbing the walls trying to get her out the building like they did on the like they did January 6th. They trying to climb the walls and snatch her out the building. So imagine coming into all of that and getting it all together. Like that's the crazy part of it. It took her about 20 years, but she dealt with all of that craziness, and she ended up being able to level it out. She was a brilliant, brilliant woman. So this I thought was interesting too. So by 1656, under her new form of peace, which she had negotiated herself, she actually changed her. There was major changes to her royal court. Whereas in wartime, her court. Now you know her royal court is like the people who she keeps the closest around her. That's her royal court. So royal court was full of women, just like in like Black Panther. So, but in her royal court, in times of wartime, she adapted a masculine dress and mannerisms of that of a warlord, and so did her court. But in post-war era, Nzinga's court became more feminine, and she adapted new fashions. She imported silk goods from Europe and placed a renewed focus on education, and she replaced the military drills with education. So that was like her saying, you know, we at peace now, we got to move into something different. And I thought this was funny. She abolished concubinage, which means Nzinga had a bunch of husbands, y'all. So it was not just for the men to have a bunch of concubines. Nzinga had her own concubines because she was the queen. So she had a bunch of concubines that were men. And she eventually married her favorite one and got rid of the other ones. So Nzinga was a boss. So this is the last slide. So if you are interested in learning more about women in African American history and how, because it has been overlooked. It's been chiefly overlooked, and there's a lot of ways of looking at it that is best told through us. So if you are looking for people to kind of fill in some of the gaps and learn more, Audre Lorde is an amazing resource. Dr. Patricia Hill Collins is an amazing resource. Dr. Angela Davis. Kimberly Crenshaw is kind of a new age Black womanist. She's like more of a newer Black feminist thought. Assata Shakur is my personal favorite. I could do a whole class on Assata by herself. Assata is still on the FBI's most wanted list in Cuba because she escaped to Cuba. She's a Panther. She's a Black Panther who they railroaded and accused of murder, and she ended up escaping the jail in the United States and left for Cuba, and Cuba will not give her back. They will not extradite her. She's an amazing woman, and her story is crazy. They put her in solitary confinement for like 2 years Yeah, 2 whole years. She said she was in there so long she forgot how to speak. Yeah. So she has an amazing story, and she's an amazing woman. And my personal favorite is Bell Hooks. Bell Hooks is my favorite, one of my favorite authors, period. But she is definitely my favorite in feminist thought. She never spells her name with capital letters because she said that she never wants her work to reflect who she is. She wants her work to be about the work itself. So she wants less of her, more of her work. She is absolutely the quintessential thought for me. I learned so much through reading her books around Black feminism. And again, she leads from a place of love. She wrote more books about love and Black love as much as she did around Black feminism. And her Black feminism was like, I'm gonna tell you the truth about the realities, but at the same time, I'm going to tell you the truth about how we love and how we need each other. I love Bell Hooks. So, when lions have historians, hunters cease to be heroes. Black women gotta tell their own stories, and everybody needs to read the stories of Black women and let Black women take up space and let Black women tell their stories for ourselves, because we can either be the left or we can be the right, and we can go either way. So we are lions as well, and sometimes that lion can be a beautiful, peaceful lion, or I've seen lionesses kill male lions in the wild. I've seen it. On the Discovery Channel, they get 3 or 4 of them, and they would kill a rival